What you're about to see is a speech by Tim Picciott of the Liberty Advisor from TDV in Acapulco, Mexico. This was recorded in February before the recent correction in the heavily bubbled stock market. Tim has been making incredible calls for his clients for years, and we are happy to have him here at WHAM. On January 15th, he made a huge move into puts, which have now made his clients 181%. The reason I mention this is because he is doing what most advisors do not do well in a crash scenario: save money. He got most of the upside last year, and the put options gave Tim's clients a defined downside. You can check the links below if you want to become a client of Tim's. Of course, I must stress this is not financial advice, but we are here to nudge people in what we believe to be the best direction for the sake of freedom, prosperity, and financial independence. Here you will see Tim speak on the notion that we are living in the best economy ever. Tim will break down the deception and clear the air. He explains some of his strategies as well. Considering what has happened to the stock market in the past week, the premonition here was incredible. You won't want to go anywhere. We hope you enjoy this video.
So I am a financial advisor, and I don't want to lose my job for speaking here like I did 2 years ago. So I got to give a quick disclaimer and say basically, unless I'm your financial advisor and giving you actual advice, that this is all for informational purposes only, and that's probably enough of that. Okay, so let me get into, so 2 years ago I came here and I spoke about charitable giving strategies for how people who made a lot of money in cryptocurrencies, how they could sell it to certain types of trusts. Those trusts would then bypass all capital gains legally. So for every $1 million, you're talking about $238,000 of savings. Then on top of that, you get tax deductions that would be based upon the amount you're putting in, your age, some other stuff. And I thought it was really the perfect strategy. I started working on this in 2017. And unfortunately, kind of the backstory of how I ended up here is, as I'm working on this, all of a sudden the price of crypto skyrockets, and it's on everybody's radar. I'm already set to speak at Acapulco, and the advisory firm that I was with, LPL Financial, the largest independent broker-dealer in America, actually banned every single advisor in America from talking about Bitcoin, thinking about Bitcoin, having daydreams about Bitcoin. So needless to say, they did not want me to speak up here. And being the anarchist that I am, basically told them to fuck off, and I'm speaking here anyways. So ended up... So for doing that, and I had just moved to that firm 2 years ago, I had other advisors underneath me, and I ended up having to drop my Series 7 license, sell my entire brokerage book of business, pay a $17,000 fine. Then the state of Arizona then decided to hold on to my paperwork for about 8 months and wouldn't approve me, when the previous firm I left at 8 in the morning and was good to go by 8:30. And so, here I am. I then had to end up selling my house proactively to make all this go on. But now I'm actually now managing more money today than I was 2 years ago. So they can suck it. But it was a very long journey to get here. So then last year, I spoke on the 7 greatest retirement risks that retirees face. And if you guys want to get those speeches, you can text. The number is 71441. It's going to be on all the slides. And then you're going to text in the body TDV. So pretty easy to remember, basically dropping Harvard on your shoulders for free. Another one that I'm going to drop on you guys is I wrote a book called, and this really dives into a lot of what I'm going to be talking about today, which is going to be a complete teardown of the notion that this is the greatest economy in the history of the world. And so I wrote a little 18-page guide that shows how the inflation rate's rigged, how the unemployment data is rigged, and how the GDP is rigged. And this was initially made to make fun of everyone that was touting how great Obama was doing. And now it's a great book to tout how Trump is not doing a great job. So I've been able to expand the life cycle of this book, so it's great that everyone are idiots listening to the mainstream media. So what's on the agenda today? We're going to take a look at what the Fed has been doing the past decade, and then what this means going forward. We're going to take a look at what the repo markets are. I know it's a sexy conversation, repo markets, but trust me, it is important. And then, as I promised before, we're going to get into is this really the greatest economy ever? Different black swans that are out there, and then some contrarian thoughts on the election. Now, I also want to point out, so I'm not some Trump derangement syndrome person. At the time, I was the most anti-Hillary person probably in the world. putting out tons of stuff to try to make sure Hillary didn't win. I was sick and tired of the Libertarian Party that they were talking about taking away guns and bake the cake and all this other bullshit, that I decided, you know what, I'm going to go press for Trump, and was probably running the largest Libertarian for Trump page. Then my daughter was born his first day in office and ended up wearing a Trump shirt, and now this is going to be a complete, absolute takedown of everything that's going on. So nobody can say, oh, you're just some libtard that's doing all this stuff because I reached 10% of what the Russians did the week of the election. So, the Russians, yeah. So what I want to now present is something called the dot plots. A lot of people are not familiar with the dot plots. What the dot plots are, what each one of these dots represents a Federal Reserve governor that. Okay, is that better? That better? Okay, thank you for that. So each one of these dots represents a Federal Reserve governor and what their view of where interest rates will be both this year, next year, the following year, and in the long term. So 8 years ago, they said 5 years ago, we would have been at about 4.25% at the Fed funds rate. So obviously, that didn't happen. 6 years ago, they said that 3 years ago, we'd be at 3.75% on the Fed funds rate. Obviously, that didn't happen. And then 2016, hard for me to see because of the glare, let's call it 2.75%. Then a few months ago, they said, okay, we're going to be at, hard for me to see, but like around like 2%. There's no way, what is going to happen is that this is probably actually going to slope down. These guys have been wrong the entire time. And to give you an idea of how controlled financial advisors are, in 2011, I sent my client an email saying the Fed's in a rock and a hard place and they can never raise rates. And I actually got a compliance ding because they went through my emails and said, you're not allowed to prognosticate on what the Fed's doing. They're smarter than you, and don't ever do that again. So I don't know if they should have hired me to be their economist, what they should have done. But now we're going to get into the repocalypse, is what I'm calling it, or repo madness is another one that I like too. So it's important to talk about what the Fed funds rate really is, because I think this is really misunderstood. The Fed funds rate is the rate of when banks go to the Federal Reserve as a lender of last resort to borrow money from the Fed. In actuality, though, that's not how things actually work. What happens is the banks need to hold 10% in reserves every night. And so some banks are going to have 9. Let's say some banks are going to have 11. I guess that wasn't an inside joke, but actually I just made it up right now. But so some banks are going to have a little bit too much money, some won't have enough money, so the banks that have too much are going to lend to the banks that don't have enough. What went on in September, and very few people know this, is that the banks were charging each other 10% to lend money overnight, 10%. That went on for one night. But what is more shocking about that is that they could have went to the Federal Reserve at the time and borrowed money for 2.5%. They chose to borrow money at 10% because it would have been like a scarlet letter that everyone would have known if they would have gone to the discount window. So no bank wanted to have that stigma. And so now, since we live in such a transparent world, they decided, well, we're just going to let everybody go borrow from it, and we're not going to tell you for 2 years. That way we don't actually know what banks are actually at risk. Now, there's actually a lot of speculation that JP Morgan was doing different things, but that's a whole other subject of how we ended up into this situation. And so that is just something that a lot of people are not aware of that's actually going on. Now, what we're looking at over here is typically these repo operations, they were just overnight. It wasn't for very much money at all. I mean, just take a look. I mean, this was just, just in the month of January what was going on. And you'll notice that these were going on for 2 weeks. And I also have to thank my man, John Snyson of World Alternative Media in the front row here, who alerted me to the fact that now they've extended it out for 32 days. So they're not only going night over night, they're extending this out for over a month. Whew. So now the Fed's balance sheet. So we were told when we were at $4.2 trillion of debt that they were going to eventually bring it down to zero. And I was calling fake news on that right from the very beginning. Now this scale only goes to, 3.2 million? I mean, this scale doesn't go all the way down to zero. And so this is like a 600-pound person losing 5 pounds and then saying if they lose any more weight, they're going to die. And then now we're on our way to weigh about 610 pounds. Just the other day, what is his name? Not Osama Ben Bernanke, but Jerome Powell. So Jerome Powell the other day said, what we're going to do in the next financial crisis is we're going to have a massive amounts of quantitative easing. So what's going on now doesn't qualify as massive, even though it's just as much as what the Fed is doing. And another thing that's shocking is how things work when the government issues new debt. The Treasury issues debt to the primary dealers. The primary dealers are, like the too big to fail mega banks like JP Morgan, Bank of America, so on and so forth. What they're doing is, so they're buying bonds from the Treasury. Then when those bonds settle, like a couple days later, the Federal Reserve is then coming in and buying those same bonds from the banks. So it's like saying, hey, I'll go sell this to you for $100, and then he's guaranteed to go buy it back from you in 3 days for $101. It's a stealth bailout, and it's actual debt monetization. You can go to treasurydirect.gov. I mean, this is not some tinfoil hat site. You can go to newyorkfed.gov. You can track the QSIP numbers like we did here, and you can get all that information. And if you guys want to text the number below, I'll eventually just send all this out to you guys, so it can save you guys taking notes. So once, a few months, I'll just send all this stuff out. This slide over here, in the blue, is the Federal Reserve's money printing. And this slide's a couple years old. And what you'll notice is as soon as they stopped printing money, October of 2014, a couple days later, the Bank of Japan massively increased their program. What the Bank of Japan was doing is they were printing money out of thin air and then buying their stock market, buying their ETFs with the money that they printed out of thin air. That is actual fascism. That is the state taking over the private companies, and so so we're wondering why, hey, how come this hasn't crashed? Why hasn't the stock market going down? It's because everything is being manipulated. Then the European Central Bank, like a month or two after that, pulled this program out of their ass. I don't even know if they were even allowed to do it, but they don't care because they run everything. And so they started printing money. So it's almost like a hot potato where, okay, it's the Fed, it's done with your turn. Now it's the other central bank's turn to pick up the slack. Now, I think there's actually less of a chance of the Federal Reserve being able to pull this off, so I don't know if he's talking about his penis size or what in this one, but there's no chance of the Fed being able to pull this off whatsoever. Now we're going to get into, is this really the greatest economy in the history of the world? But first you need to understand what supposedly makes a great economy. Well, according to the fake news, it's going to be, if we have low inflation numbers, or we have low unemployment numbers, or we have a high stock market, then that's what they're defining as, quote unquote, good these days. But you have to understand how they actually go about rigging these numbers. I could give a whole presentation on this. The little pamphlet I wrote is on this subject. The number over here on the right-hand side is going to be how the government calculated inflation in the 1980s using their own numbers. There's a website called shadowstats.com that tracks it using the government's own numbers because they constantly rig how they report it. So let's say you used to buy steak, and now you buy hot dogs. Well, now they'll put the price of the hot dog in there versus the price of the steak. That's only one, or you go buy cereal or anything, and now there's less. There's so many different ways to manipulate it. It's in the book. It's free. You guys can read it in there. Now, 1990s, they changed the number. They changed the metrics again. And so based upon 1990s, actually, I lost my glasses right before we came here, so I think it's like 6%. Point being is that these are not apples to apples numbers. They constantly redefine how they do things. Same thing with the unemployment rate. So they used to count, let's say you used to be, you got a PhD, you're a nuclear engineer, and now all of a sudden you're a janitor and you're working at Uber and you're making a combined $30,000, you used to make $100,000. Well, now you count as 2 jobs to the economy versus 1, and so in Donald Trump's land and the mainstream economist land, things are actually better off. How it also used to work is if you didn't have a job, you were counted as being unemployed. Now if you don't have a job for X amount of time, now you're no longer counted as being unemployed. So technically you could have 100 million people living in their mom's basement and we could have a 0% unemployment rate just based upon how the numbers were. And I was saying this when Obama was elected, and there was another guy saying a lot of this stuff too. Oh, actually we'll get to it right now. Donald Trump, 2012. Talking about the unemployment numbers, talking about is this the strongest economy back when Barack Obama was in charge. Not a real recovery, these are phony numbers, complete fraud, phony number, 2015, don't believe 5.6, don't believe it, it's probably 40%, no, it's probably 42%, this number is so false, these numbers are not reflective, it's probably 32. First, why does he keep bouncing around from like 40 to 30? Like if you just pick one line, stick with it. Nobody has jobs, it's not a real economy, it's a phony set of numbers. Look, guys, basically everything he's calling BS on. This is my favorite one, where he says, you hear a 5% unemployment rate, it's such a phony number. That number was put in for presidents and politicians so that way they look good to the people. Donald Trump's own fucking Twitter is saying this stuff, and then now I try to say this stuff, and all these right-wingers are like, oh, you're just a fucking libtard. I'm like, I've been saying the same shit the entire time, and it was Donald Trump that was changing, and it's you guys who are allowing him to change it. And so in my opinion, he's actually put this, any Tea Party movement is completely dead. Anyone that wants to balance the budget, that movement's dead. He's actually enabled the Fed, and all these idiots are thinking, oh, well, Donald Trump hates the Federal Reserve. Well, he hates them because actually, we're going to get to that in a little bit. So sorry, a little teaser alert there. And so now he's saying, and actually this slide I made in March, and this almost came directly out of the State of the Union, and he's talking about how great the unemployment is for African Americans and Hispanic Americans and Asian Americans. I mean, I don't know if it was ever bad for the Asian Americans, but apparently they're doing well too. Then you take a look at the GDP data. I mean, can you really tell a gigantic difference from when Obama was finishing and then Trump started? I mean, it's pretty much right around the same number. And so we're wondering how Trump achieved such a great stock market. How was this man able to accomplish all of this stuff? And how he was able to accomplish this is something I'm calling derpa derpa. And so you're wondering, what does derpa derpa mean? Well, he doubled the deficit, he increased government spending, his tax bill was basically a big giveaway to the Fortune 500 companies to repatriate their money, which then led to buying back their own stocks. Then it's the Pygmalion effect. That's where if you say something enough times, people just believe it to be true. So just because I keep saying it doesn't mean it's actually true. And then we've got asking the Fed for QE and lower rates. So initially I actually had this up here, and it was the first four, and I'm like, oh wait, it spells derp. I'm like, I got to find an A and throw it in there and have a derpa, so I remember it easier. Now, take a look at the deficits. So Obama, I mean, as much as I can't stand the guy, the deficits were going down underneath Obama, and then now Cheeto Jesus has absolutely exploded the deficit, and not a single Republican could care whatsoever. And this is and unfortunately, my message is harder now to reach Republicans and conservatives than it was when Obama. I mean, they all loved me when Obama was in there, and it would probably be a lot more popular if Hillary ended up winning. But then you take a look at the budget absolutely skyrocketing. I think just the other day, they released a budget that wouldn't even balance in 15 years. And so and when he was running, I think he said, oh, and if I'm there for 8 years, well, we're going to pay off all the debt. Well, you can't pay off the debt because money is debt. So the very first dollar that was ever created in 1913 had 4% interest on it. So if you lend the first dollar into existence, at the end of year one, you owe $1.04. How do you pay back $1.04 with $1? You got to borrow another $1. And so I'd recommend Mike Maloney's Hidden Secrets of Money Part 4 for more information on that. But basically, it's a scam to begin with. And one thing I guess I didn't really get into is part of my background. My class, I ended up graduating in 2008, so great time to try to get into the financial business. And I was in a class that actually won the national competition on the Federal Reserve against Harvard, Yale, MIT. I thought they were all a bunch of nerds, so it was my classmates that all did it, and I was doing other stuff and playing water polo and stuff. But anyways, I was in the class that was indoctrinated and won the national competition, and our saying was actually, "In Fed we trust," was the actual saying. I didn't know it was private, and one day this guy looks like Rob Zombie is telling me the Fed's private. I'm like, come on, you're full of shit. I've got a Series 7, Series 66, I'm studying for the CFP, I've got all this other credentials, that doesn't matter, and I read Creature from Jekyll Island and found out that I was wrong, and here I am today. So the buybacks, those are increasing. Even this year, I think they're up over 20% from last year. The unemployment rate, Trump wants to take a victory lap at unemployment rate. Can you see any discernible difference between where things were, the trajectory of where things were headed from when all of a sudden, it's not like, I mean, the Republicans make it out to be like he got in there and then all of a sudden magic happened, when it's basically the exact same trend line. I mean, look at over here. I mean, is there really, any discernible difference between when Trump got in office and then when, as Jeff would call it, Barack Drone Bomber was in there. So again, this little 18-page book, if you guys know this stuff, all right, give it to your statist friends, give it to your parents, and it's free anyways, and then that way you don't have to explain it to them. It's really simple. It's probably takes you 25 minutes to read it. So more evidence that this is not the greatest economy ever. Morgan Stanley is making the admission that 28% of the US population has a credit score below 650. Obviously, if this is the greatest economy ever, that probably wouldn't be the case. I don't think that's too much of a stretch there. Then 78% of US workers live paycheck to paycheck, and so I would think in a great economy that probably wouldn't be the case, but I'm just a conspiracy theorist up here. So looking at the median baby boomer from 55 to 65 years old, and these are some pretty staggering numbers. So you've got 61% have less than $100,000 saved. So okay, great. You're going to get $4,000 a year in retirement income, maybe mixed with your $15,000 a year Social Security, and then the baby boom is going to live off $19,000 a year, which means they're going to have to sell their bigger houses to the millennials, and unfortunately I am a millennial, so don't hold that against me. I somehow escaped all that brainwashing, even though I went to a liberal arts school in New York. I don't know how I ended up, I just was so indoctrinated with it that I knew it was all wrong, but not all of us are bad over there. So, I mean, even this, only 22% have more than 300,000. 300,000 is nowhere near enough to retire. And these are all people that are probably keeping their money safe in bonds, safe in cash, and are going to get absolutely wrecked when we do have inflation. 7 million Americans are 90 days or more behind on their auto loan payments. I mean, MAGA. I mean, things are absolutely going great in that regard. We've got 50% of all American workers making less than $30,500 a year. I mean, and this stuff can keep going on and on and on of data points that's showing that things are not as good as we've been made out to believe. Then now we're taking a look at the S&P 500 index, also next to the Federal Reserve and other big central banks, money printing programs that they have going on. You see there's a pretty direct correlation. There was 1 week in December where the Fed's balance sheet actually decreased. And that was the same week that the stock market went down. I mean, probably just a coincidence. Especially if you're Neil Kashkari, who is the Minneapolis Fed chair, who is now calling people like us QE conspiracists, that there's a relation between money printing and the stock market. I mean, this guy is there's a good chance he could be the next Federal Reserve chair, and he's just calling us conspiracy theorists. Bill Dudley, former New York Fed head, which for those of you who don't know, the New York Fed is the one that actually basically runs the show. The New York Fed, and so Bill Dudley is also basically saying the same thing, how, we're so crazy to think that, that there's some sort of correlation here between Fed's money printing. And then we're still working on DERPA here. So this is like the A part of it, where we're lowering the Fed funds rate. And then you got Donald Trump from 2012. The Fed is destroying the dollar. When inflation hits the economy, then even more jobs will go overseas. And then you've got, over here, he's talking about the Fed needs to lower interest rates by 100, let's call it 1%, and they need to launch QE. And then on the same hand, he then says, we have only one, I can't really do his voice, we only have one real currency in the USA, and it's stronger than ever, both dependable and reliable. It is by far the most dominant currency anywhere in the world, and it will always stay that way. It is called the United States dollar. Well, actually it's called the Federal Reserve note, but I don't know, he's never read a book, so I don't know if he actually would know that. And this is actually one of my favorites. So here he is, and I think this is 2015 or 16, and he's saying that Janet Yellen is highly political. She's not raising rates for a very specific reason, because Obama told her not to, because he wants to be out playing golf in a year from now, and he wants to be doing other things, and he doesn't want to see a big bubble burst during his administration. So here he is criticizing this, and then the slide before literally asking for the same thing. But I'm just a libtard, so don't listen to me. Now, speaking of libtard, Paul Krugman, I don't know if there's anyone in the world that dislikes Paul Krugman more than me. He does have a master class in economics, if you guys want to listen to him instead of me up here, which I guess they're just giving those out to anybody these days. But here he says, maybe I missed it, but how many econo tweeters have noted that Trump both bemoans a strong dollar and celebrates the capital inflows that keep it strong? So here he is saying, massive amounts of money from China and other parts of the world is pouring into the United States for reasons of safety, investment, and interest rates. We are in a very strong position. Companies are also coming to the USA in big numbers. And so this is probably the only time I've ever agreed with Paul Krugman in my entire life. I don't really like admitting that. But then again, I guess I admitted that I voted for Trump, so I guess I'm just saying all sorts of bad things. But don't be negative. Potential black swans that are out there. We had at one point almost $17 trillion of negative interest rates that were worldwide. This number has been absolutely actually it has gone down a little bit. And this is mainly various countries that are in debt. Now, it's not only the countries. You have over $1 trillion of negative corporate bonds worldwide. So these zombie companies like Deutsche Bank, they're able to literally borrow money for next to nothing, and then they're able to, and if you can borrow money, let's say you owe $1 million at 5% interest rates, you could have a problem if you only make $100,000 a year. But if your rate is 0.001 or negative, you can float that on for a while. And so everything right now is being gamed. You take a look at interest rates around the world, various countries, most of it's negative all the way through 10 years. We're in this economic fantasy land here that I really gave the average person too much credit to not allow the politicians to do this, because I thought people were really fucking stupid, but they even blew my expectations, and this is why we're in this situation. Okay, now we have BBB bonds represents the lowest grade of investment grade bonds. pension funds are obligated to have a certain percentage, a very high percentage of their money in investment-grade bonds. Now, historically, what has happened is in past recessions, you've had a lot of these BBB bonds go into BB. And then all of a sudden now these funds are forced to sell, and when they're forced to sell, then it drives it even lower and can create a whole cascading effect. Well, assuming that doesn't even happen, going off historical numbers of where things have gone in the past, I mean, unfortunately my notes got cut off, but I think it was around $800 billion of debt downgrades that we could expect, which could then create a whole nother tsunami. And so they can never afford to have this whole thing implode, because then this is also tied in to the pensions. And I accidentally discovered through one of my clients' pension forms that the government actually mandated in 2015 that the pensions used to calculate their interest rates, they use a trailing 25-year LIBOR rate, and they used to use like what the current interest rate is. So the government is literally using like assumed bond interest rates of like 6 or 7% that they have to do. So even on their bullshit numbers, they're not even going to make it on that. I mean, even if they were 100% funded, I don't even know if they'd end up making it. Same thing at the state and local government level, they're screwed. I mean, all the states, have pretty high obligations. And one of the reasons that this is, and I talked a lot about this stuff and a lot of others in my presentation from last year, so I'd really recommend you guys text that number to get that one from last year. But let's say the market goes down 30% and you're withdrawing 4. You've got to go up 63% over the next 3 years to get back to even. And so now if your bonds have just been absolutely obliterated, you're going to have to sell at a loss. There's no way, once this next recession happens again, there's no way out of it just based upon how things are going. And a lot of these funds probably have to withdraw a lot more than 4. So even Morgan Stanley is saying, okay, if someone has 60% stocks, 40% bonds, they can only expect about 2.8% over the next decade. Vanguard, very similar numbers. They're thinking that, pretty much right in line. There's other analysis saying that essentially when we're in the top level of stocks being expensive, as represented by the PE ratio, the forward 10-year on the S&P has only been 4.3%. And so you take a look at this dark blue line. The dark blue line represents the earnings of the companies, and then the light blue line represents basically how expensive stocks are. So it's basically stocks are getting more expensive and companies are not really earning any more money. And this actually came out yesterday. John is my witness at 9 in the morning. I coined this, and then Trump ended up using it later in the day. And so MAGA stocks actually now year-to-date represent 67% of the S&P 500's year-to-date gains. And what do I mean by the MAGA stocks? Microsoft, Apple, Google, and Amazon represent 67% of all the S&P 500's gains for this year. And so I'm sure Trump is absolutely in love with that, even though all these companies hate him. So how do we manage risk? So as I did mention, I am a financial advisor. I started in 2008. I was running an endowment that actually lost the least amount of money of any endowment when I was in school, because we had everything in cash leading into the 2008 crisis, and the guys that inherited my fund, they got all the credit, and now some of them work at the Fed, and I'm up here exposing them to you guys instead. So what did we learn from 2008? I mean, in 2008, basically everything went down, and so you have to really think about risk in a different way. You can't just buy and hold. Things are not the same as what they used to be. And so I got up here last year and told you what my investment strategy was. I put it out there. You guys can go back, see what it was from last year. And that strategy did incredibly well, still doing well. And so I didn't end up moving my clients over till about September, October of the whole me having to quit my job to come here 2 years ago. And so when my clients started moving over, I had put out a video actually the day before Jerome Powell said we were on autopilot. And then I ended up texting it to people that texted in. It was like the only thing I've texted you guys in like 2 years. And I was saying my strategy was, I think the market's going to go down because the Fed said they're going to be selling off $50 billion of bonds a month. You got the ECB, they said that they're going to stop printing money. And I go, well, wait a minute, how is the Fed going to do this? The Fed is the largest buyer of all the bonds. Now they're going to be the largest seller, and we're going to have to fund a $1.2 trillion deficit. Mathematically speaking, there's no way that this can happen. They only let the market go down for 2 months, and at 2 months what they did is they then started printing, they reneged in every single thing they said they were going to do, and they started printing money again through the repo operations we were also talking about. They started lowering rates. More importantly, they signaled that they weren't going to raise rates anymore. So what my strategy is I was long some different stock indexes, and I also had put options on the S&P 500. So essentially what that means in layman's terms is it's like you buy homeowners insurance, and you hope you don't use it, but if your house price goes up, then you get the house value appreciation minus the cost of insurance, but if your house burns down, we build your house back. And so when everything was collapsing in October, November, December of 2018, our clients were down like 3-4%. And then if I had a crystal ball, I should have sold those, but I didn't. And so what ended up happening last year, we went up close to 25, 26% in the same strategy, but my clients only had a max 3 or 4% downside. I'll be at the Liberty Advisor booth the rest of the week if you guys are interested in how you can get yourselves into that type of strategy. If you don't know anything about options, I would not just go out and try to do this yourself because it is, it can be extremely risky if you don't know what you're doing. Now, last Monday, China, because of the whole coronavirus, they printed, at the time, it was almost down to the billions of a dollar. They printed basically the market cap of Bitcoin in one day, last Monday. So that was just one day, last Monday because of the coronavirus. So, at the time, actually, luckily, Bitcoin's gone up a lot since I put this together last week. And you guys text a number, you get all the goodies from 2018, from 2019. I'll send this one out to you guys eventually. And that's a way to keep in touch because I did leave some places where you guys can find me online, but it's increasingly getting harder to reach people because of shadow banning. I've been stuck at 30,000 Facebook followers. I got it after 3 months, and I've been stuck there for 4 years. So I really know how this stuff is going to go down. I've only got 30 seconds. I think Donald Trump actually does not have as good of a chance of winning as people think he does. One of the reasons, I only got a couple of seconds left, so the reasons I think that is because, let's say, you're in Wisconsin, you're 18 years old, smoking weed in your mom's basement. Hillary has a 98% chance of winning. Why are you going to go get up off your ass to go vote? Because you were told he's going to win. This time, every single one of those people are going to be fired up. They don't pay attention to what's going on. They don't care about the debates. They're all going to be out there. If you're working with the deep state, are you going to go and risk getting a felony if Hillary has it locked up? No, you're not. This time, they're going to throw every single thing at Donald Trump. I'm a neutral. I'm not voting. Yeah, so I'm obviously do not care for anyone who's running. And all they really need to do is swing the election in a very few amount of states and a few counties. There's so many different ways they can do this. And that's pretty much all I've got. Yeah, the millennials are all a bunch of socialists. I think you guys already know that. This slide was made a couple months ago, and I actually do think there is a good chance Hillary will kind of step in. Pete Buttigieg, he's the CIA intelligence asset in case Joe Biden faltered. I said that over a year ago on my buddy's show. And I think that he's going to be the one that they try to install, assuming that Hillary doesn't try to make a comeback. But yeah, you guys text the number, you get all the talks from last year. Here's the services I offered. I'm right out front. But I appreciate you guys putting up with me. I know one guy fell asleep right up there, but aside from him, I appreciate everybody else. And thank you very much. I'm so sorry, guys. Do I just stay up here, or I don't know?
Thank you so much for watching. I just want to let people know that I do offer portfolio management services. So if you have an old IRA, 401k, here's my dog Yoshi, that is something that we can help you out with. Most of my client assets actually are in traditional assets, but I also help people who manage different cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin as well. So I help advise on different tax strategies, and I don't do taxes, but different types of charitable trust, charitable remainder trust, charitable lead trust, donor advised funds, all sorts of different strategies you can use to help lower your highly appreciated Bitcoin. We also have strategies where we can help people who want crypto inside their retirement accounts where they hold on to the private keys. So that's something you're really not going to see any other financial advisors be able to offer. And then I did mention before that at least when it comes to the traditional side of things, how we manage money is a very untraditional. So we do use, it's sort of like buying homeowners insurance. So if your house burns down, the homeowners insurance kicks in, rebuilds your house. That's sort of like how a put option works, but a little bit more complicated than that. So we can actually definitively say what your max downside is. And in this type of environment, when you've got crazy people running like Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders and everyone that wants to go spend $50 trillion on this or that over the next decade, I think it's wise to have portfolio insurance. But who knows? I mean, the Federal Reserve, the other central banks, the game plan is to print a whole bunch of money. We think that our strategy will benefit from that as well. But I do want to let people know that these are services that I do offer. Most of my clients come all across the country. There's actually very few that do live in Phoenix. So I do use Zoom meetings, talk with people, basically whatever most convenient for them. But I am Tim Picciott, the Liberty Advisor. I work for Innovative Advisory Group, LLC. So you can find them at innovativewealth.com to do more due diligence. You can look me up on FINRA Broker Check and see that I haven't had any complaints since 2008 when I started working. And my website is thelibertyadvisor.com to find out more. But anyways, thank you for watching. And if you want to get a hold of me, you can go to thelibertyadvisor.com, schedule straight from the drop-in, and then look forward to working with you. Thank you.
Like what you see here, OM? Don't forget to check the links below. GoFundMe, Patreon, Subscribe Star. We really can't do it without you. We've been so insanely shadow banned, about 90% at this point, and 95% demonetized. As Susan Wojcicki, the CEO of YouTube, comes in and says that she is shutting down quote-unquote controversial content and cutting out the views on this controversial content by 70%. She's been bragging about it. We need your help more than ever in this battle for truth in information. You guys are what keeps us alive, so we really appreciate just even $1 a month makes a huge difference. If everyone could give just $1 a month, we wouldn't even have to worry about competing against the mainstream propaganda networks. You can also donate to our Bitcoin address on the screen for you to scan if you please, as well as in the comments and description. Liking and sharing makes a big difference as well, and finding us on alternative social media platforms like float.app, that's flote.app, makes a huge difference. We're at Josh Sigurdsson as well as at Wham. Float is replacing Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, Tumblr, Reddit, and Patreon all in one with encrypted private messaging, and of course monetization on videos for creators, live streams with super chats in crypto, and most of all, no algorithm, because at the end of the day, it's all about reach, guys. This is all about actually reaching people with the message and waking up the public. You can also find us on Instagram, Twitter, Minds, BitChute, all sorts of different platforms. Try to follow us on as many things as possible, because very soon this channel will very likely just be completely deleted from YouTube, and you'll never see us again, and you'll be stuck with only the mainstream networks. Also, come on out and see us at Anarcho Vegas 2020 in Las Vegas, Nevada in July, where such speakers such as G. Edward Griffin and many others will be speaking. You could use promo code WHAM on your VIP tickets and save 10%, as well as buy extremely cheap tickets for just $20.20. You won't find a cheaper conference than this with such amazing names. Check anarchovegas.com for more information on that. We hope to see you out there. And anyway, I really appreciate all of you guys joining us. You make it possible for us to survive in this volatile, propagandized climate. Until next time, this is Josh Sigurdsson signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth, be the change.
I'm sure you have already changed people's minds in your young age because you're involved, and I like that.
Wow.